My girlfriend has princess syndrome. I fully support her, but I worry about drawing unwanted attention. Despite my concerns, she broke up with me. I have been with my girlfriend for about 5 months. We've been casual friends since college, but only began dating after she graduated. We get along really well. When I say princess syndrome, I don't mean that she is spoiled or entitled, because she isn't. Her clothes seem to take over her life. She dresses like a sort of fairy tale princess on a near daily basis, excluding at work. Long frilly skirts, lace blouses, things like that. It works for her because she is very pretty and can pull it off. At first I found it to be very endearing, but then I became aware of how much time she spends on her outfits. She runs a blog that has a sizable amount of followers, and she is constantly posting outfit pictures, links to clothing items, and whatnot. She spends a few hours a day on her blog, at least. Then she spends time sewing items for new outfits or for her Etsy store. When we go out, we get a lot of stares at what she's wearing. Her unique style draws eyes like moths to a flame. People can't seem to help themselves from taking a second look, sometimes even a third. It's not just the occasional glance either. I've seen people stop in their tracks, nudging their friends and pointing her out as if she were a celebrity sighting. I've also caught people sneaking pictures of her on their cell phones, which is incredibly invasive. Once we were at a cafe, and a guy at the next table was pretending to text, but was clearly angling his phone to snap a photo of her lacy blouse and long flowing skirt. Another time, a group of teenagers at the mall giggled and took selfies with her in the background. This attention makes me uncomfortable. It feels like we're always on display, unable to enjoy a private moment together. I tried to address this with her, asking her to tone it down a bit. She took my request to mean not wearing anything in her hair when we're out together, so she stopped putting on her usual flower crowns and headbands. While this was a small change, it didn't solve the core issue. She still wore her elaborate outfits, and the stares and sneaky photos continued. I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't about the accessories but about the overall impression her outfits left on people. I have told her several times that I love her just the way she is, but she seems to brush it off. Each time I try to emphasize how much I appreciate her unique style and creativity, and how much it drew me to her in the first place. I want her to know that my concerns come from a place of love and worry, not criticism. However, whenever I bring it up, she smiles, thanks me, and then moves on to another topic. It feels like she's not fully hearing what I'm trying to say, or perhaps she's choosing not to. I had hoped that when she started her new job in the career of her choice, she would become more serious, at least in her professional life. I thought the new environment might encourage her to dress more conventionally, to match her colleagues and the office culture. Instead, her new boss and co-workers encouraged her to embrace her style. They love her whimsical outfits and even compliment her on them regularly. It's like she's become the quirky, fashionable mascot of the office, which only reinforces her choices. While I'm happy that she's found such a supportive workplace, I worry that people won't take her seriously, or miss how kind and intelligent she is because they're too focused on her appearance. I fear that her clothes might overshadow her capabilities, making it harder for her to be recognized for her hard work and talent. I know how brilliant and compassionate she is, but I'm concerned others might not see past the frills and lace. How can I talk to her about dressing more appropriately without hurting her feelings? I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I don't want to come across as controlling or unsupportive, but I also want to protect her from potential judgment. I need to find a way to express my concerns that balances my love for her uniqueness with my hope for her to be seen for who she truly is. It's a delicate conversation, and I can think of ways to say one half of that, but it doesn't work with the other half. I get the point that it initially drew me to her, because it did. That's fair. I guess I didn't think that it would be such a constant thing in her life, especially after she graduated. This is my problem. How do I ask her to dress more casually around me without her misinterpreting what I mean again and also not hurting her feelings? I can think of ways to say one half of that, but it doesn't work with the other half. She doesn't need all the frilly stuff, she'd still look like a princess even in simpler outfits. Her natural beauty and grace are what truly shine through, not just the elaborate clothes she wears. I've told her she has an effortless elegance that doesn't rely on layers of lace and ruffles. Yet, despite my reassurances, she continues to adorn herself with intricate details and fairy tale ensembles. And it's one thing for an artsy college student to dress alternatively, it's almost expected and embraced in that environment. Back in college, her style fit right in with the creative, free-spirited atmosphere. But she's a 23-year-old woman now, stepping into the professional world where first impressions and appearances can carry significant weight. I worry that her whimsical wardrobe might not be perceived as appropriate for her age and the stage of life she's in. I feel like her clothing masks how smart she is and makes her appear shallow. When people see her in these fantastical outfits, they might not take the time to look beyond the surface. They might assume she's all about fashion and overlook her sharp mind and compassionate heart. I know how intelligent and thoughtful she is, how she can have deep conversations about a myriad of topics, and how much she cares about the people around her. But I fear that others might miss out on these qualities because they're too focused on her appearance. It's frustrating because I see her potential, and the wonderful person she is, but I also see how society can be quick to judge based on looks. I want her to be recognized for her talents and kindness, not just her distinctive style. I wish she could find a balance that allows her true self to shine without the distraction of overly ornate clothing. I do think it's an attention thing. She says she doesn't care about what people think about her, but she spends so much time on her blog, replying to comments and such. I kind of doubt it. Her blog is a significant part of her life. She spends hours curating posts, taking photos, and interacting with her followers. If she truly didn't care about others' opinions, would she invest so much effort into maintaining her online presence? It feels like she thrives on the validation and admiration she gets from her audience. She also has told me that she loves being approached by little girls while she's dressed up, which definitely makes me think it's about attention. She beams with joy when a child comes up to her, eyes wide with awe, asking if she's a real princess. She often recounts these encounters with delight, describing how their faces light up and how she feels like she's spreading a bit of magic in their lives. It's heartwarming, but it also makes me wonder if part of her motivation for dressing this way is the attention and admiration she receives, even if she won't admit it outright. She doesn't dress inappropriately by those standards, she is well groomed and doesn't show much skin. Her outfits are always neat, and she takes great care to ensure everything is perfectly coordinated. But is it appropriate to wear lace dresses and flower crowns to the supermarket? It's one thing to see such attire at a themed event or a festival, but it's quite another in everyday settings like grocery shopping. Again, it attracts unnecessary attention. People stare, some whisper, and others even take photos. While she might enjoy the attention, it can be overwhelming for me. I want to be able to do mundane activities without feeling like we're putting on a show. I worry that this constant spotlight might also affect her in ways she doesn't realize. It's not just about the looks and comments, it's about being able to blend in when needed, to be taken seriously, and to avoid the judgments that inevitably come with standing out so much. Update 1. I didn't plan on updating, but things changed. I realized from my last post that I needed to be more supportive but also communicate on how she could dress down on certain occasions so we could both be comfortable. Well, I never got a chance to talk to her about it. Last week she called and wanted to stop by my apartment after work. When she got there I offered to make dinner, but she said she couldn't stay and we had to talk. I jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me, and she looked really guilty. You can see where this is going. Last week she called and wanted to stop by my apartment after work. Her voice sounded a bit off, not as cheerful as usual, but I didn't think much of it at the time. When she got there, she looked beautiful as always, dressed in one of her signature outfits, a soft pink lace blouse, and a flowing floral skirt. But there was something in her eyes, a seriousness that made my stomach churn with unease. I offered to make dinner, hoping to lighten the mood and maybe turn the evening around. She usually loved my cooking, and I thought a nice meal might help ease whatever was on her mind. But she said she couldn't stay and that we had to talk. The way she said it, with a quiet firmness, made my heart sink. Trying to break the tension, I jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me. I forced a laugh, expecting her to smile and reassure me that it was nothing serious. But instead, she looked really guilty. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and she bit her lip, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. At that moment, I knew where this was going, even if I didn't want to believe it. She took a deep breath and started to explain, her voice trembling slightly. She talked about how we were in different places in life and had different goals for the future. She said she had been thinking about this for a while, and it wasn't an easy decision for her. Well, she talked, and I mostly listened, too stunned to say much. But as she spoke, I found myself agreeing with her points, despite the lump forming in my throat. It was a pretty amicable breakup, even though I felt blindsided by it. We both acknowledged that we cared deeply for each other but had to be honest about our differences. We agreed to stay friends, though at that moment, the idea of friendship felt like a poor consolation prize for what we were losing. I've never been dumped before, and it's fucking awful. The weight of the conversation hung in the air as she left, and I was left standing there in the silence of my apartment, feeling more alone than ever. I've never been dumped before, and it's fucking awful. I'm having trouble with the whole social media thing post-breakup. I want a way to keep in touch with her, but as soon as her relationship status changed, all these alternative-looking guys have been liking her posts and commenting on her pictures. I don't think she's seeing these guys, but it still hurts. My friend wants to set me up on a date, but I don't know if it's a good idea. I'm still reeling from the breakup and unsure if I'm ready to jump back into the dating pool. The thought of starting over with someone new feels overwhelming. On one hand, I appreciate my friend's effort to help me move on, but on the other, I'm still processing everything that happened. I understood some of her reasoning for the breakup. Mainly, I want to move out of the city once my lease is up, and I wanted her to move in with me. I had dreams of living somewhere quieter, maybe closer to nature, where life felt less hectic. I envisioned us building a life together away from the noise and chaos of the city. I was worried about the long distance, knowing how tough it could be on a relationship. I thought if she moved in with me, we could avoid that strain and grow closer. But she didn't want to leave the city. She loves the vibrant energy, the endless activities, and the opportunities it offers for her career and her blog. The city is part of her identity, and she couldn't see herself thriving anywhere else. She tried to explain how much the city meant to her, how it inspired her creativity and connected her to a community that appreciated her unique style. I understood her point, but it still hurt to realize our visions for the future were so different. This fundamental difference in our goals was something we couldn't reconcile. It wasn't just about where we lived, but how we saw our lives unfolding. She saw herself staying in the bustling heart of the city, while I longed for a slower pace in a more serene environment. It became clear that our paths were diverging, and no amount of compromise could bridge that gap. She said something about me being controlling too, but I don't think that's the case at all. It stung to hear her say that, because in my heart, I know that all I truly want is to protect her against all the potential harm that all the attention might attract. I've always been deeply concerned about how others might perceive her and the potential judgments they might make based solely on her appearance. My intentions were never to control her or dictate how she should live her life. I fell in love with her precisely because of her unique style and vibrant personality. However, seeing how people reacted to her, the stares, the whispers, and the sneaky photos, made me worry about her well-being. I feared that this constant attention could bring unwanted consequences, from simple misunderstandings to more severe risks. It wasn't about changing who she was, it was about ensuring she was safe and respected. I didn't want anyone to look down on her for any reason. Her clothes, while beautiful and distinctive, could sometimes overshadow her intelligence, kindness, and all the other qualities that made her so special. I was worried that people might not take her seriously in professional settings or might underestimate her capabilities because they were too focused on her outward appearance. All I wanted was for her to be seen and appreciated for who she truly was, not just for how she dressed. I believed that if she toned down her outfits a bit, it would help others see past the frills and lace to the incredible person underneath. My suggestions were meant to protect her from potential prejudice and ensure she was given the respect she deserved. It hurts that she interpreted my concerns as controlling behavior. Update 2. I was going through an old email and found this account again. I was surprised I could still log in, and even more by the amount of people who had reached out to me. Whoa, while going through an old email, I stumbled upon this account again. It was a blast from the past that I didn't expect. I was surprised that after years I could still log in, and even more by the amount of people who had reached out to me. Messages of support, advice and shared experiences filled my inbox. It was both touching and overwhelming to see how many people had connected with my story and taken the time to respond. It's a bit embarrassing to relive this breakup from almost 10 years ago. Reading through my old posts and the raw emotions I poured into them brought back memories I had long since buried. I could almost feel the sting of heartbreak and the confusion that followed. But now, with the distance of time, I can see things more clearly. In retrospect, it wasn't meant to be, and I think I was reeling more from getting dumped than the actual loss of the relationship. At the time, the breakup felt like the end of the world. It was my first time being dumped, and my ego took a significant hit. The shock and pain were intense, and I struggled to make sense of it all. But looking back now, I realized that our paths were always meant to diverge. We had fundamental differences in our life goals and values that would have eventually pulled us apart, even if we had stayed together longer. What I initially perceived as a deep loss was more about the bruising of my pride and the fear of the unknown future. The relationship itself, while meaningful, wasn't the perfect match I had convinced myself it was. We cared for each other, but we were ultimately incompatible in ways that mattered. It's clear to me now that the breakup was a necessary step for both of us, to find the right paths in our lives. Reflecting on it all, I can see how much I've grown since then. I am 33 now and married to a wonderful woman, who's 31. We've been married for 4 years, and I couldn't be happier with how our life together has unfolded. My wife is amazing. She's kind, thoughtful, and has a zest for life that is truly infectious. One of the biggest lessons I learned from my past relationship was the importance of supporting my significant other's hobbies and passions. It's something I've embraced wholeheartedly in my marriage. My wife loves running and baking, 2 hobbies that bring her immense joy and fulfillment. She's an avid runner, participating in local marathons and relishing the thrill of pushing her limits. Early morning runs have become a cherished part of her routine, and I admire her dedication and discipline. On weekends, our kitchen transforms into a baking haven where she experiments with new recipes, filling our home with the delightful aroma of freshly baked goods. Her passion for baking has become a source of happiness for our family, and our friends eagerly await her latest creations. We have a daughter who is turning 3 this year. She's the light of our lives, and watching her grow has been an incredible journey. As a father, I want her to be free to express herself however she likes, as long as it is safe, of course. Whether she wants to dress up as a princess, become an astronaut, or anything in between, I want her to feel supported and loved in her choices. Encouraging her to explore her interests and express her individuality is something I am deeply committed to. I would do anything for them. My wife and daughter mean the world to me, and their happiness is my top priority. I've learned to be more patient, understanding, and supportive. Qualities that have strengthened our bond as a family. The lessons from my past have shaped me into a better partner and parent, and I strive to create a loving environment where we all feel valued and respected. Supporting my wife's passions and nurturing our daughter's creativity has brought us closer together. It's a dynamic and joyful household, filled with love, laughter, and the occasional flower fight during baking sessions. I'm grateful for the journey that led me here, and for the beautiful family I am fortunate to call my own. I am still friends with my ex on social media. We don't talk but we'll like each other's posts. She is married to another woman now who also dresses differently. It's not as frilly as she used to dress, but still unusual. Her pictures look like something out of Anne of Green Gables. She seems very happy on their farm together. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know. My sister is severely autistic and I hate her for turning my life into a living nightmare. I hate her. That should be wrong to say, but it doesn't feel like it. Ever since my sister was born, it's like I vanished from my parents' radar. I was 6, excited to be a big sister, but that excitement faded fast. The shift was gradual but undeniable. Suddenly, I was moving into the basement because she needed to be closer to mom and dad. That hurt. The basement was creepy and cold, and I missed the warmth of being near them. Nights down there were long and lonely. I'd hear the rest of the family upstairs and feel so cut off, like I was more of an afterthought than a daughter. Losing my toys to her was another blow. She didn't mean to break them, but it happened all the time. I remember trying to explain to my parents how it made me feel, hoping for a bit of sympathy, maybe even justice. But all I got was, "She's younger, she doesn't understand. You're the big sister, you should be more understanding." It felt so unfair. Those toys were my escape, and seeing them broken, without anyone caring enough to address it, just piled on the feeling of being invisible. The MacBook incident was the last straw. School had given it to me because I'd been doing really well, and then one day, it was just destroyed. My school was mad at me for being careless, and my parents. They just added to the blame. No one stopped to consider it wasn't actually my fault. I was furious and hurt, but mostly, I felt alone in dealing with the mess. It wasn't just about a laptop, it was about feeling like nobody had my back. Honestly, trying to balance being a sister and having a life is rough. I love my sister, sure, but it's like my parents forget I'm still a kid too. Every time she needs something, I have to drop everything. Doesn't matter if I'm studying, hanging out, or even trying to catch a break. It's like I'm on call 24/7 without even signing up for it. I couldn't remember the last time I hung out with friends without constantly checking my phone, worried I'd miss a call from home needing me to rush back. My life felt like it was on a perpetual pause, always waiting for the next crisis or the next demand for help. The day I decided to go watch the new Spider-Man movie was a big deal for me. It had been ages since I'd made plans that felt purely for my own enjoyment. My friend Jake had been talking about it for weeks, and his excitement was contagious. I needed that break, a couple of hours where I could just be a teenager, not a caretaker. So, I made a decision. I figured, just this once, I'd turn my phone off to enjoy the movie. Not worry about anything else. Just 2 hours, you know? Walking out of the theater, turning my phone back on, I felt like I was hit by a truck. Missed calls and texts everywhere. I called home immediately, the joy from the movie evaporating with each ring. When my mom picked up, her anger cut through me. "Where have you been? We needed you an hour ago." I could barely get a word in. I rushed home, feeling guilty but also kind of angry. When I got there, it was like walking into a storm. My parents were furious, their disappointment a tangible force in the room. "We rely on you, and you just decide to disappear? To watch a movie?" My dad's voice was sharp, his words punctuated by my sister's background noises, like going to a movie was some kind of crime. I tried explaining I just wanted a break, that I just wanted a couple of hours to myself, but it fell on deaf ears. It didn't matter. "Your responsibilities here are more important than some movie," my mom added, her words final. They grounded me, Said I was being irresponsible. All over a movie. Sitting in my room after ward, it hit me. This wasn't about the movie, it was about feeling stuck. Yeah, I get it, my sister needs me. But sometimes, I just want to do something normal, without feeling guilty or getting into trouble for it. Being 18 and feeling like you're not allowed to have your own life is tough. It was about feeling trapped in a role I never chose, about longing for a piece of normalcy in a life that felt anything but normal. I loved my sister deeply, but in that moment, I couldn't help but feel robbed of the simple teenage experiences, of friendships and carefree moments. Living in my house feels like I'm trapped in a loop where everything revolves around my sister and her needs. Don't get me wrong, I get it. She needs a lot of care, and I want to be there for her. But sometimes, it feels like I'm just another item on the family's to-do list. Help your sister. Make sure she's okay. Can't you see we're busy with her? It's exhausting, feeling more like an extra hand. It's like I'm invisible unless they need something for her. This feeling of being a slave in my own home, it's suffocating. I carry this weight around, a burden that's made me question my own worth. Around the house than an actual member of the family. Then there was this one week that felt like it could be different. I had been chosen to give a speech at a school event. Something about that recognition, it lit a spark in me. I worked hard on that speech, pouring my thoughts and feelings into every word. When my parents said they'd be there to watch me, for the first time in a long time, I felt valued. Finally, something about me. I worked on my speech every night, imagining looking into the crowd and seeing my parents there, maybe even catching them smiling proudly. The excitement was like a beacon, a rare light in the usual dimness of my daily life. Like, maybe this time things would be different. But they weren't. They missed it because of something with my sister. Once again they blamed it on my sister. Standing there, about to start my speech, and not seeing them crushed me. I pushed through, voice shaky and hands trembling. I cried, not just for the speech, but for all the times I felt sidelined. Yeah, I made it through, and people clapped, but it felt empty. The whole walk home, I couldn't stop the tears. It's not like I wanted to make a big deal about them missing the speech, but it just hit hard. It felt like a reminder that no matter what happens with me, it'll always be secondary. And walking home, all I could think was how this pattern seems like it's never going to end. Talking about colleges with my dad was something I'd been looking forward to. It started off pretty normal. I was actually excited, you know? For once, it felt like we were focusing on my future, on something that was about me. I was getting into the idea, thinking maybe college was my chance to get out and do my own thing, away from all the chaos at home. We were looking at some brochures, talking majors and campuses. It was the closest to dreaming I'd gotten in a long time. Then my dad made that joke. Something about picking a high-paying major so I'd be set to take care of my sister when they're gone. He laughed, thinking it was just a light-hearted comment, I guess. But it hit me hard. All my bottled-up feelings just exploded. I lost it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started crying, then yelling, telling him how unfair it was that my entire life was expected to revolve around being my sister's caretaker. It was all coming out, every bit of resentment, every moment of feeling overlooked and undervalued, trying to make him see how much I've had to give up, how everything always circles back to what my sister needs. But they didn't get it. My parents just stood there, staring at me like I was speaking another language, watching me lose it. No comfort, no apologies, nothing. Their faces were so cold, so detached. It was like they couldn't understand why I was so upset over a joke. That's when I realized they weren't going to hear me out. I ran to my room, slammed the door, and I've been here ever since. And here's the thing. I've been in there for hours, and they haven't even bothered to check on me. Not a knock, not a word. Nothing. It's like my outburst didn't matter to them. It's so lonely sitting here, knowing that even this, me being this upset, isn't enough to get them to see how much I'm hurting. It's like I'm trapped in this role they've set for me, and my feelings about it don't matter at all. Am I wrong for wanting more than this? For wanting to be seen as more than just a future caretaker for my sister? It just feels like no matter what I do, it's like my life doesn't matter. I am nothing to them. Nothing more than just an insurance for my sister after they are gone. After hours turned into a day, and then another, with no word from my parents, something in me clicked. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had to change. It wasn't just about getting away for a bit. It was about needing some space to figure out my own stuff without always being pulled back into the same old situation. I thought of the one person who'd always seemed to get it. Grandpa. Without making a big plan, I just packed some essentials into a backpack one night and left. I texted him I was coming over, half expecting him to talk me out of it or to call my parents. But he didn't. He just texted back, "Doors open." Staying with Grandpa has been eye-opening. It's not like every moment has been some deep heart-to-heart, but it's just calm here. He lets me be. We've talked about college, about what I might want to do, and it's the first time in a while I've been able to think about my future without feeling guilty or stressed. He's been supportive, encouraging me to think about what I want, not what I feel obligated to do. It's weird, but in just a week here, I've felt more like myself than I have in years. We've had meals together, watched some old movies, and he's shared stories about when he was my age. It's been nice, simple, and kind of freeing. I've even started researching colleges again, this time looking at programs I'm actually interested in, not just ones that might make enough money to take care of my sister in the future. Being with Grandpa has given me a glimpse of what that might look like, and it's something I want to hold on to. Wow, thank you for all the support and love that you guys have given me. I never expected this post to reach the popularity it did. Thank you all. After thinking about it for these past few hours, you are right that I don't despise my sister. It's not her fault that she was born the way she is. My parents came to talk to me a while after my breakdown, but I was unable to bring myself to talk to them and only cried and asked them to leave. They have made arrangements with my grandfather for me to stay with him for the time being. My parents want to talk to me, but we have decided it's best I leave for now to have some space and time to collect myself. We will be sitting down and talking later this week about this issue. Thank you all again for the love and support through this. I started by telling my grandpa the story of why I broke down the way I did, and to be honest, when I finally spilled everything to Grandpa, his reaction was way more intense than I expected. I mean, I knew he'd be surprised, but he looked downright shocked, horrified. I told him all about how things have been at home, how I've basically been my sister's full-time caregiver on top of everything else, and how it all came crashing down that day with my dad's joke about college and taking care of her forever. Grandpa was seriously upset, especially when he found out that my sister was supposed to have professional help that she wasn't getting. He said a lot of stuff. He told me some things that I don't feel comfortable repeating here, but in essence my sister is supposed to be getting care from a professional and that my parents were ignoring that. But the gist was that it wasn't right or safe for me to be in that position, especially with how things were with my sister. He couldn't believe my parents were putting all this on me, and that they'd kept so much from the rest of the family. He was also really mad about the whole movie incident, saying it was the last straw that showed how unfairly I was being treated. Grandpa's pretty chill most of the time, so seeing him this mad was kind of a big deal. He told me straight up not to talk to my parents unless he was there, which was a relief honestly. He said he'd talk to them first, sort everything out, and be there with me for any conversations in the future. But it wasn't just Grandpa. Over the next few days, I heard from aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. They were all checking in, making sure I was okay, and they were all just as shocked as Grandpa was. Turns out, my parents had been telling everyone they had a professional caregiver for my sister, and even taking money from the family to pay for it. Except, that caregiver never existed. Everyone was pretty upset about being lied to, especially about something so serious. This past week? Man, it's been a roller coaster. Tough, yeah, but also kinda eye-opening in a good way. The whole drama with my parents and finding out all that stuff I had no idea about was a lot to handle. But then, there's been this unexpected silver lining. My extended family stepping up in ways I didn't even know I needed. Grandpa's been at the center of it all, trying to make up for what he keeps calling lost time. He's been really pushing me to just be a teenager again. It's weird but nice, getting nudged to hang out with my friends more, or just chill and do whatever I feel like, stuff I haven't really done in, well, forever. It's like he's on this mission to help me reclaim parts of my life I didn't even realize I was missing out on. And it's not just him. My aunts and uncles have been amazing too. They've been around a lot this week, checking in, bringing over food, just talking and actually listening. It's like they're making this massive effort to show they care, to make sure I don't feel alone in this whole mess. It's pretty overwhelming, but in the best way possible. For the first time in what feels like ages, I'm not just the sister, or the caretaker. I'm just me, and that feels really good. The talk with my parents on Saturday night. Disaster doesn't even cover it. I went in hoping maybe, just maybe, we could start fixing things. Instead, it fell apart even more. They actually admitted to a bunch of stuff. Stuff so messed up I can't even bring myself to type it out here. But the kicker? Not a single sorry came out of their mouths. Instead they doubled down, saying I was pretty much born to be my sister's caretaker. Yeah, my dad actually said that. Like my whole purpose was just about taking care of her. I couldn't keep it together. All the stuff I'd found out, all the support I'd been getting from the rest of the family, it all just bubbled up. I called them out on everything. The lies about the caretaker, the money they were supposedly spending on it but actually weren't, all of it. But they just dodged and made excuses. By the end of the talk, things were even worse than before. It felt like hitting a brick wall, trying to get through to them. I'd gone into that conversation with a sliver of hope that we could mend things, but I walked out feeling like that chance was completely torched. So, after that disaster talk with my parents, I made up my mind. I'm done. Had a long chat with Grandpa and my uncle last night, and we all agreed it's best if I don't go back. Today's the day I'm officially moving out to live with Grandpa. It feels weird, making this huge change, but it also feels right. Like, I finally have some control over my life again. I've also decided I'm leaving the state for college once I'm done with high school. Just the thought of starting fresh somewhere new is kind of thrilling. My aunt, she's been incredible through all this. She told me she's going to start sending the money directly to me, the money she used to give to my dad for my sister's care. Guess it's going to be my college fund now. My parents? They've called a couple of times since that night, but if you're thinking they called to say sorry or that they missed me, nah. They just wanted to know when I was planning to come back home. It's like they're not even trying to understand why I had to leave. I know this is going to be a huge change, and honestly, I'm kind of scared. But at the same time, I feel this weight lifting off me. I'm finally making decisions for myself, and there's something really freeing about that. Today's just the start of something new, I guess. Deciding not to go back to my parents was tough, not gonna lie. There's this uneasy feeling sitting in my stomach, but deep down, I think it'll fade with time. The support I've been getting from the rest of my family has been unreal. It's weird. Even though I've made this big decision, feeling all their love and support makes the whole situation a bit easier to handle. But yeah, the harsh truth? I've pretty much lost my parents through all this. That realization hits hard. It's a lot to process, and sometimes I catch myself wishing things could have been different. But through all the mess, I've come to see something really important. I don't hate my sister. That anger I thought I felt towards her was misplaced. She's not the one to blame for how our parents chose to handle things. I love her, more than I can say, and hating her for something she had no control over was wrong on so many levels. I hope, someday, I can make that right. For now though, leaving is what I need to do for myself. It's about finding my own way, figuring out who I am outside of this whole situation. It's going to be a journey, but I'm ready for it. Edit. Thank you all so much. I wish I could respond to every single one of you, but my lunch only lasts so long. I'll update tonight how the move out went, but until then, thank you all. I want to say that your support has been amazing, and your kindness means more to me than anyone could ever imagine. Moving out was surreal. Grandpa and my uncle were with me every step of the way, helping me pack up my life into boxes and bags. Everything that meant something to me, we took. Make sure to grab all the important stuff like my birth certificate and social security card. It felt weirdly official, like I was collecting pieces of my old life to start a new one. My parents? They were pretty much silent the whole time. Dad took off with my sister not long after I got there, leaving just my mom to watch us pack. She didn't say much, just hovered in the background. It was awkward, tense even. But then, as we were about to leave, she finally broke down. She said she loved me, that she'd miss me. After days of silence, those words hit differently. I hugged her, said goodbye. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting in my new room at Grandpa's house, I keep replaying that moment. Did she mean what she said? After everything, it's hard to know for sure. But I want to believe she did. Right now, all I can do is focus on what's ahead. Maybe, with time, my parents and I can find a way back to each other. My wife just passed away. My father told me to marry another woman just like he did. This started a war between us.
I, 26 male, lost my wife, Annie, over a year ago when our two children were only 18 months and 4 years old. She was only 25. Annie and I had two kids, who were barely 18 months and 4 years old at the time, almost the exact age I was when I lost my mom. The parallel was chilling, and it forced me to confront the full circle my life had taken. I was only 5 when my mom passed away. It's one of those memories that isn't just a single moment, it's like a shadow that stretched long over my childhood. Growing up, everything seemed a bit grayer, a bit more muted without her. The house was quieter, and Dad was always busy, trying to fill the void her absence left in every corner of our life. He did his best, but you could tell he was just as lost in grief as I was. Even though he tried to hide it behind long hours at work and forced smiles at dinner, I remember feeling perpetually confused too. Why my mom? Why our family? Friends would talk about their moms, their plans for Mother's Day, and it felt like living in a world where everyone else had something precious that I had lost. Birthdays and holidays were the hardest. Dad tried, he really did. But there's a particular kind of emptiness that comes from missing a person who was supposed to be there for those moments. As I grew older, that confusion turned into a deep-seated fear of loss, clinging too tightly to relationships or shying away from them entirely to avoid the potential heartbreak. It wasn't until much later, in my own adult relationships, that I began to understand the depth of my fear. Therapy helped. Talking about her, about the memories and the pain, made it more bearable. Losing Mom so young fundamentally shaped who I am. It made me more empathetic towards others' pain, more aware of the fragility of life. Back then, the world seemed suddenly bigger and more intimidating without my mom. Even though I was too young to comprehend all the ways her passing would impact me, I felt her absence in every part of my daily life. There was an emptiness at home, a silence that wasn't just about the lack of her voice but about the missing layer of love and security she represented. Annie always had this vivid memory of her dad, how he'd lift her high above his head and make her feel like she could touch the clouds. She was just 6 when he was taken from her. Swept away by a sudden illness that none of us were ready to face. That loss carved a deep aching void in her life. One that shaped her in ways she only sometimes talked about. She grew up determined to be the pillar her dad couldn't be for her, to build a fortress of love for our kids that nothing could penetrate, not even death. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was a crisp fall morning, much like any other, except Annie wasn't feeling well. We thought little of it at first, a passing bug, we hoped, but it turned out to be much more serious. Within months we were grappling with a reality that mirrored her deepest fears. Annie was diagnosed with a terminal illness, the kind that sneaks up silently but quickly overwhelms. In those final months, Annie's resolve to make lasting memories with our kids became everything. Every day, despite her waning strength, she'd spend time with them, reading stories, playing games, or just holding them close, embedding her presence in their lives in ways she hoped would be indelible. She often spoke to me late at night, her voice a mixture of determination and despair, about her need to leave a legacy of love for them, to be there in their hearts and minds even when she could no longer be there in person. She wanted so desperately to break the cycle of loss that had shadowed her childhood, to give our kids the stable, loving foundation she had lost so early on. Her biggest fear was repeating history, leaving our kids with the same hollow memories and unanswerable questions she had struggled with watching Annie with our children. I saw the lengths she went to imprint her love on their young lives. She would record videos for them, leave little notes in unexpected places, and create traditions that could carry on in her absence. Her creativity in weaving these threads of connection was both inspiring and heart-wrenching. When she passed, the loss was monumental. Echoing the emptiness of her own childhood but also filled with the richness of the love she had poured into every moment with them. Annie had always had a clear vision of her own funeral. Unusual as that might sound. It was something we'd talked about occasionally, those strange, somber discussions that unexpectedly pop up and linger between a couple. She wanted it to be more a celebration of her life than a mourning of her death. "Don't make it all doom and gloom," she'd say, half joking but serious about the essence of her wishes. "Make it a day where everyone can remember the happy times, with lots of flowers and maybe even some fireworks." When it happened, I was plunged into a deep grief that was hard to navigate, filled with the pain of loss but also the duty to honor her final wishes. The day of her funeral arrived on a bright and clear morning, which felt almost offensive in the context of our loss, yet fitting for the type of farewell she had envisioned. The service was held at our local church, a place she had chosen not just for its spiritual significance but also for its beautiful stained glass windows and the way the sunlight danced through them in the mornings. It was here, under the vivid colors cast by the morning light, that friends and family gathered, not in black, but in bright colors, as she had requested. Flowers adorned every surface, wildflowers, her favorite, in vibrant hues of blues, yellows and reds, creating a tapestry of color that transformed the usually somber space into one that was alive with remembrance and love. The air was filled with her favorite music, a mix of classic rock and folk tunes, songs that had soundtracked our life together. Each melody stirred memories, bringing smiles even through the tears. After the service, we moved to a nearby park, another place Annie loved. It was here that the atmosphere lightened, as people shared their stories about Annie, her quirks, her laugh, her boundless energy. It felt like she was there with us, in the laughter and the shared memories. As the sun began to set, we prepared for the final act of the day, the fireworks. It was an unconventional choice, but it was exactly what she had wanted. As the first rocket shot into the sky, bursting into a cascade of color, it felt like a release, a letting go of some of the sorrow and a celebration of a spirit too vibrant to ever be really gone. Each explosion of light was a reminder of her vibrant life, a punctuating finale that she would have loved. Now, as I watch our children grow, I see Annie's influence in their resilience, their laughter, and even in their tears. They talk about her often, recalling moments I didn't even realize they remembered. It's clear that while death took Annie away too soon, her efforts to be a present, loving force in their lives didn't go in vain. She lives on through them, through the stories we share and the love we keep alive. As their father, my role has evolved to not just nurturing them but also preserving the essence of what Annie wanted for them, a sense of security, love and the knowledge that they were and always will be cherished, no matter what life throws our way. Now as I watch my own children, I see that same confusion and loss reflected in their eyes. They look for Annie in simple moments, when they accomplish something small like tying their shoelaces or when they need comfort after a bad dream. I know those feelings. I live them. It's a reminder of how deeply a child feels the absence of a parent, often in ways they can't fully express. This shared experience has deepened my empathy and understanding of my children's emotions. I often find myself navigating their grief while managing my own, trying to be the rock that they can lean on. It's not just about providing for them materially but ensuring they feel safe and loved, that they have space to miss their mom without feeling like they need to hide their grief. Their journey through loss has also reshaped my approach to parenting. I'm more patient, more attuned to the unspoken parts of their sadness, and more proactive in addressing our emotional health as a family. We talk about Annie often, keeping her memory alive, not as a shadow that hangs over us but as a light that continues to guide us. I strive to be present in a way I felt my dad struggled to be after my mom died. Seeing my children cope with their loss, I understand the long road ahead of them. I know the challenges they'll face as they grow up without their mom, but I also see their resilience, and it gives me hope. It reminds me that while the pain of loss never fully disappears, it can be woven into the fabric of our lives, making us stronger and more connected to each other. I've promised myself to be there for them, to help them navigate this journey, and to ensure they never doubt they are loved, both by their mom, whose love continues beyond her absence, and by me, who stands with them every step of the way. After my mom passed away, the house felt suspended in time, with remnants of her life tucked into every corner. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books remained on the shelves, and the air carried the gentle hint of her perfume. This stillness, this preserved world of hers, was abruptly disrupted when my dad announced he was remarrying. It was barely a year since we'd lost her, and the news fell on me like a cold wave. Ellen moved in shortly after their wedding. She brought with her boxes filled with new items, new routines, and a new presence that seemed to flood the spaces my mom had once inhabited. Her attempts at reorganizing the house, from rearranging the living room to replacing the curtains my mom had chosen, felt less like mere changes and more like erasures of the life we had lived. Ellen was kind, or at least she tried to be. She would cook meals she thought I would enjoy and make small talk, attempting to bridge the gap between us. However, her efforts felt forced. Each kind gesture, no matter how well intended, felt like an intrusion. As if she was trying to stitch herself into the fabric of a family portrait where she didn't quite belong. I resisted, not out of spite for her as a person, but out of a deep-seated loyalty to my mom's memory and a child's grief that clung stubbornly to the past. The situation at home grew tense. My reactions to Ellen's changes ranged from silent withdrawal to outright defiance. I would put things back where Mom had left them, insist on using the same old dishes instead of the new ones Ellen brought, and avoid spending time in the newly redecorated spaces. I missed the familiarity of my old life, the comfort of knowing every corner held a piece of my mom. My dad, caught between his attempt to move forward and his child's resistance, often became frustrated. Arguments became more frequent. He would accuse me of being unreasonable, of not giving Ellen a fair chance. I saw it differently. I felt he was erasing Mom's legacy, pushing me to forget rather than remember. One particularly heated evening, my dad snapped after finding me rearranging the living room to its original state. "We can't live in a museum," he yelled. "We have to move on, you have to move on." But how could I move on? Mom's shadow was in every laughter that had echoed through these rooms, in every step I took around the furniture she had carefully chosen, in every scent that lingered. The house felt increasingly like a battleground, where every alteration to its old state felt like a loss, a reminder of how swiftly and ruthlessly life could change. Ellen, caught in the middle, gradually stopped trying so hard to win me over, retreating instead into whatever peace she could find with my dad. During those initial months after Ellen moved in, the atmosphere in our home became increasingly strained. I was still grappling with the loss of my mom, often finding solace in old photos and mementos that kept her memory alive. My vulnerability and frequent bouts of tears were a stark reminder of the raw pain that lingered in our home. It was during this time that Dad's demeanor towards me shifted drastically. The few times I showed vulnerability or cried for Mom, he reacted not with comfort but with frustration. He would yell, telling me to grow up and stop crying. It was clear he was grappling with his own pain, but his approach left me feeling abandoned in my grief. One night, after finding me crying in my room with a picture of Mom, "Enough," he barked, his voice echoing against the walls. "You need to grow up and stop crying all the time. Life has to move on." His words, meant to push me towards resilience, felt more like a dismissal of my grief. I looked up at him, my heart sinking. "I miss her, Dad," I managed to choke out, the words barely a whisper. "Why can't you just let me miss her?" His next words were like a cold slap. "I'm happier now, and you should be too. I love Ellen more than I ever loved your mom." He declared it with a harsh certainty that seemed to seal the growing gap between us. The room fell silent, save for the quiet sobs that I couldn't hold back. Those words, harsh and raw, sliced through the fragile thread of understanding that had tethered us. I felt not just the loss of my mom but also the creeping loss of my dad, who was now a stranger driven by his own grief and newfound happiness. Those words, harsh and raw, cut deeply, wounding me more than the tears I shed for Mom. As the years passed, the emotional distance grew. Dad was increasingly absent, not just physically but emotionally. My cries for attention, for the affection I missed so desperately, went unanswered. His priorities had shifted, and I felt sidelined, an unwelcome reminder of a past he wanted to forget. Ellen, for all her efforts, could never bridge the gap between Dad and me. It felt like a betrayal, not just of Mom's memory but of the father-son bond we should have had. Feeling abandoned and misunderstood, I withdrew into myself. The isolation at home led me to seek solace elsewhere. In books, in school activities, anywhere I could find a semblance of the care and attention I lacked at home. But the impact of those formative years lingered. I harbored a deep-seated mistrust for relationships, fearful of being left behind again, of loving someone who might one day decide I wasn't worth sticking around for. As an adult looking back, I can see that Dad was dealing with his grief in his own flawed way, but the understanding of his pain does little to soothe the resentment and hurt of a child who felt left behind. Now, facing my own challenges as a widower, I'm determined to be the father to my children that I needed when I was their age, one who is present, supportive, and unconditionally loving, no matter what life throws our way. But after Annie died, my dad, he reached out to tell me he hoped I understood him better and cut him some slack for everything. I didn't respond to him at the time because I was in the most immediate sense of grief still. Today it's still raw, but I'm in therapy to try and find peace in my life. He reached out to me a few more times and he apologized for his initial message. We met up a few days ago per his request. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral place that seemed suitable for what was already a tense discussion waiting to unfold. As I sat across from him, still wearing my wedding ring, a stark symbol of my ongoing grief, it didn't take long for the conversation to veer into uncomfortable territory. He noticed the ring almost immediately and took it as a cue to voice his thoughts on moving forward. "You can't keep living in the past," he said. "It's time to think about your future, maybe start meeting people again." I clenched my jaw, feeling the old frustration simmer. I asked him to drop the subject, but he pressed on, perhaps thinking that pushing me was for my own good. That's when he brought up his own past, his quick remarriage after my mom's death. He explained, not for the first time, but certainly in the most explicit way, how his new wife had brought him happiness, something he thought was impossible after Mom. "I needed that, and I think you do too," he said earnestly. "I thought you'd understand by now, especially with the kids needing a mother figure." His words stung sharply. It wasn't just the suggestion that I replace Annie, but the implication that my grief was somehow a selfish indulgence that I should move past for the sake of the kids. He went further, saying that he hoped I would eventually see the benefit of his choices, that I would stop holding on to my resentment and realize that embracing someone new wasn't a betrayal of my late wife. I told him firmly, "It doesn't work that way. Grieving isn't just something you turn off to make room for someone else. And it certainly doesn't work on a convenient timeline." I could see the frustration in his face, mirroring the anger in mine. "You think I hate you for being happy with her, but it's not about that. It's about how you handled everything when Mom died, how you pushed her memory out as if it was the only way to be happy again." He was taken aback by my bluntness. Perhaps he hadn't realized how deeply his actions had hurt me, or maybe he had never considered that his path to happiness had left a trail of pain in its wake. Our conversation grew heated, voices raised enough that other patrons shot us wary glances. The air was tense as my father and I reached a fragile point in our conversation. His earlier remarks about moving on and finding new love had pushed me to a breaking point. Seeing the shock on his face when I challenged his views on grief and moving forward, he paused, Looking genuinely bewildered. "How do you expect to find someone else to love you and the kids if you're still hung up on Annie?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern but also a hint of frustration. It was a question that might have been genuine in his mind but felt like an accusation to me. "Annie was the love of my life," I replied, my voice firm, each word laden with unyielding truth. "And yes, I'm still hung up on her because love doesn't just end when someone dies. You don't just replace someone like that." I could see him trying to process my words, his eyes searching mine for something, perhaps a sign of the son he once knew who hadn't been shattered by loss. I continued, "My children, they are my heart, Dad. They're the other loves of my life, but it's different. They depend on me not just to love them, but to provide safety, security, and a sense of normalcy in a world that was turned upside down." The cafe noises faded into the background as I leaned in slightly, needing him to really hear me. "It's my job, my duty, to give them the best life I can. That doesn't mean rushing to fill a void with a new person. It means being there for them, fully, without distractions or replacements for their mom." He was stunned, perhaps by the intensity of my conviction or maybe by the realization that our views on handling grief and love were worlds apart. "But you need someone too," he finally muttered, almost to himself, a note of sadness creeping into his voice. "I needed my dad when I lost my mom," I shot back, the words spilling out with a mix of pain and defiance. "But instead, I got a man who was too quick to move on, too quick to replace her. I won't do that to my kids. I won't let them feel as I did, secondary to someone else's happiness." We were at the end of our coffees, the dregs cold and bitter, much like the mood that had settled over our table. As my father eyed me, ready to offer another piece of his mind on how I should live my life, I cut him off. The frustration and hurt from years of bottled-up feelings were brimming over. "I need to make this clear," I began, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "I will never, ever tell my children to just get over their mom's death. I'm not going to sit them down and tell them their mom is dead and that they need to accept a new mother." The cafe, usually a backdrop of clinking cups and indistinct chatter, seemed to quieten around us. My dad watched me, his expression hardening as he prepared to defend his own actions again. But I wasn't finished. "And another thing," I continued. "I'm not going to scold them for missing her, for crying out for her at night. It's normal. They're kids, and they lost their mother. How could I possibly take that grief and make it about someone else's discomfort? That's not what they need. They need a dad who understands their pain, not one who silences it." My dad shifted uncomfortably, his eyes briefly dropping to the table before meeting mine again. "You think I don't know that?" he muttered, his voice a mix of defensiveness and weariness. "I think you forgot it when it mattered," I shot back, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "You remarried so quickly, and it felt like you were trying to erase Mom from our lives. You expected me to just accept it, to be okay with all the changes because you were." I leaned forward, making sure my point was clear. "I am not looking to find them a new mother. What I am striving to do is to be the best dad I can be, given the shitty hand we've been dealt. I want to give them stability, love and understanding, not rush to fill a perceived gap with the first person who comes along." I paused, my heart pounding with the intensity of the confession. "And I will never, ever make them feel like they are second to anyone else in my life. The way you did with me. You made it clear you loved your new wife more, and I felt like I had lost you too, not just Mom." He finally said something about regret. How he regretted that I couldn't see his perspective, that maybe one day I'd understand. But as I walked away from that cafe, I knew that understanding wasn't just about seeing his point of view. It was about recognizing the deep divides in how we processed loss. I wasn't ready to forgive his past actions just because he had found happiness. My path was different, and I needed him to respect that without judgment or pressure. As I drove home, the weight of our fractured relationship heavier than ever, I realized that some gaps might be too wide to bridge, at least for now. The last time I saw my dad at that cafe, it felt like a definitive line had been drawn. In the weeks that followed, he tried to reach out a few times. Texts, a couple of voicemails. His voice always held that familiar mix of concern and awkwardness, as if he wasn't quite sure what to say or how to say it without reigniting the flames of our last argument. Each attempt at bridging the gap seemed to remind me of the wide chasm that had formed between us over the years. I wasn't ready to cross it yet, so I responded sparingly, my replies brief and non-committal, until eventually, I stopped responding altogether. The silence that settled wasn't peaceful, but it was necessary. Life went on as it does, filled with the daily routines and small crises of raising two kids alone. I threw myself into being a dad, the soccer games, school projects, bedtime stories. Every smile and tear from my kids reminded me of my promise to be the steady presence they needed. I often thought about that conversation with my dad, turning over his words and mine, questioning the harshness of my responses and the rigidness of my stance. Yet every time I considered reaching out, I remembered the feeling of being a kid who felt second best, and I'd retreat, convinced I needed more time. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed, and so did the kids. They grew taller, their faces losing the last traces of toddlerhood. My dad's attempts to connect became a memory almost as distant as the happier times before Mom's death. In the quiet moments late at night, when the house was still and my mind refused to rest, I pondered the cost of my steadfastness. Was holding on to my hurt worth the growing silence between us? It was a chilly evening, the kind that hinted at the approach of winter, as I climbed up to the attic to sort through some old boxes that had been gathering dust. The attic, with its musty smell and beams of moonlight sneaking through the small window, always felt like a capsule of the past, untouched and full of secrets waiting to be rediscovered. As I sifted through the boxes, my hands found an old photo album. Its cover worn and slightly faded. Curiosity piqued, I sat down on an old creaky chair, the album resting heavily in my lap. Flipping it open, I was greeted by vibrant pictures of my mom and dad. They were younger then, full of life and laughter, captured in moments of sheer joy: picnics in the park, beach vacations, and quiet afternoons at home. Each photo was a portal to a time before grief had reshaped our lives, to a family that once was. My finger traced the outlines of those happier days, lingering on the images of my dad with his wide, carefree smile. It struck me then how much I missed him. Not just the physical presence, but the essence of who he had been before tragedy had turned him into someone I could barely recognize, let alone understand. Seeing him so happy and unburdened in these photos made the contrast with his later years even more poignant. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, softening the hard edges of the resentment I'd held onto for so long. It wasn't just my mom I missed, but my dad as he was back then. It dawned on me how much the sorrow had changed him. How it had stolen that joyful person from the photographs and left someone else in his place. Someone consumed by his own grief, making choices I couldn't comprehend. Sitting there in the attic, surrounded by relics of my childhood, I felt the weight of years of misunderstanding and missed connections heavy on my chest. The memories of laughter and love, so vivid in those photographs, seemed at odds with the strained, awkward encounters that had defined our recent years. The realization was a quiet but profound turning point. Maybe there was room for reconciliation, a chance to rediscover the man from those pictures, to understand the journey he had taken from there to here. Perhaps it was time to bridge the gap that grief had widened. To approach him not just as the man who had made decisions I struggled to forgive, but as my dad, who had once been the entire world to a much younger version of me. Resolute, I closed the album, a plan forming in my mind. I would reach out to him, try to initiate a conversation not just about what went wrong but about what had once been right. It felt like a daunting task, filled with potential for pain but also for healing. As I descended from the attic, leaving the quiet sanctuary of the past behind, I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with newfound understanding and a hopeful heart. It made me think about how the kids would remember these years. Would they see a dad who stood his ground, or one who let old wounds dictate the future? The thought unsettled me enough to consider that perhaps it was time to try a different approach, not for my sake, but for the kids, who deserve to know all facets of their family, even the complicated ones. The next morning, I drafted a message to my dad, simple yet more open than anything I'd sent in a long time. "Let's talk," it read, "when you're ready." I wasn't sure where a conversation might lead us or whether it would heal any old hurts, but I knew it was a start, a small step toward understanding, or at least coexistence, in this new chapter of our lives. As I hit send, the silence I had grown accustomed to seemed a little less daunting, tinted with the possibility of something new.
I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years, and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I'd never used, a small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car, between the cushions, and it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his co-worker, Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona's," he said with a shrug, turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. No apology, no concern. Just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal, and I was overreacting. His indifference felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his co-workers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples, spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences, like the challenges of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings, no big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. So, I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency, and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's co-worker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbents. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either pucking my husband, pucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items, there were none, and even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, And at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleepsuits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for, or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them, so I was bewildered. And kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again, if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So, I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered though, I got my long-awaited confirmation, last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around, trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms, all while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work. A ring notification. Motion at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by. But what I saw left me stunned. There on my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare, and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home, with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake? A misunderstanding? Or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes. There, on the footage captured by our Ring doorbell, was a scene straight out of a nightmare, a woman I hadn't seen in years, leading my youngest daughter into our home hand in hand, with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare, and my husband at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again. My sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, a desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the puck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse, and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house, with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all, and still, somehow, infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or, worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her, so they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. The casual way he had lied to me, the ease with which he had kept this secret, made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life I had dressed her in myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I'd given birth. 4 years later I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months, and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation. And a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself. When confronted, he stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress, about his sister just wanting to make amends, but his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit that had tainted our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life. With a heavy heart, I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end. But it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being, and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know.